Hello, friends. We're going to talk today about the big full moon in Leo that is coming up on February 1st. And I have to say, this is a very powerful chart. I mean, we've got a full moon in Leo, and Leo, of course, is, the lion and sovereign energy, massive creativity, fire. Like Leo, likes to be the center of attention. My dad was a Leo, so I know that energy pretty well. So we've got a full moon in Leo, and then we also have Mars conjunct Pluto in the gate 41 in Aquarius, and we also have 3 motors defined and 2 channels. So there's a lot going on. We've got 5 different layers to unpack in this moon. Let's go ahead and get started. So let's remember, at a full moon, the full light of the sun is shining on the moon. And in the astrological wheel and in the human design mandala, they're actually opposite each other. So we've got the sun is in Aquarius and the moon is in Libra. So they're opposite each other, right? And then in the human design system, the earth is going to be also with where the moon is. So the moon and the earth are both in the gate 33 in the human design system. The gate 33 is one of the 3 storytelling gates in the chart. It's in the sensing circuit. And so it's right-brained energy. It's creative. It's expansive. It's embodied and experiential. So it's not left-brained energy. It's not analytical and strategic and linear like that. Not at all. It's very much an energy about tapping into our creativity, tapping into our bodies, tapping into our connection with the all that is. And then it's known as retelling in quantum human design. I like to think of it as sort of the collective narrative that we are in right now, and how might we want to retell a story that we've been living inside of that isn't serving us anymore. It's definitely collective circuitry, and it is how we think about the past, and how we're talking about the past in the present, and what does that mean for us for how we look at the future. And of course, there is massive debate and polarization in our world right now about the stories about the past that are influencing how we're experiencing the present, and then also how we're going to take a look at the future. So let's unpack this a little bit, okay? So the earth is inviting us to ground ourselves into a sense of narrative. And how can we retell stories of the past so that they're more beneficial for the present and for the future? Because a lot of times we look to the past, our brain does that predictively, right? It always goes back into the past and goes, what have we done before that was like what's happening now, so that we can understand what's going on. That's how our brain work. So in order for us to really be able to move into the past and not just project it into our future, which is kind of what we do automatically, is to bring forward into our awareness, what are the stories of the past that we've been living inside of, and do we want to change them? So the moon is really lighting that up. The earth is saying, let's ground ourselves in our understanding of our stories. And I'll just let you know, I don't have the negative association with stories that a lot of people in sort of the spiritual world, they're always like, oh, that's just story. And I'm like, well, there's many, many different variations of story, and narrative is a fundamental way in which we understand our world. Telling stories is the way human beings have been communicating value, communicating how we know who we are as a people, communicating, moral lessons, right? Communicating what's going on in our hearts and how our relationships work and our relationship to the living world. I mean, stories are a core part of how we make sense of our world and how we know who we are and how we relate to each other. So I'm a big believer that story is vital and important. The question is what story are we living inside of, right? And it's when we're living inside of a story that is false or no longer relevant, or is just a loop that we made up, and actually isn't accurate to something that we've experienced, but is more like a trauma pattern right, that shows up as a story. Those are things we want to revise, right? We don't want to give all our attention to those type of stories, but we can be very empowered by stories. And I know when I wrote my first book many years ago, it was about the story of the United States. And my purpose in writing that was, how can we understand the narrative of the United States in the 19th century with Africans and African Americans right in the center of it, rather than shunted to the side that says, oh yeah, and by the way, slavery happened. It's like, no, actually, that was a core part of how the United States developed, right? Was from the labor, forced labor, usually, of Africans and African Americans. And that was a really important part of of who we were as a people. Now, of course, people who are living more in the narrative of the brave pioneers coming and moving into an empty continent and, bringing civilization, right? People who are really attached to their narrative didn't like that other narrative that I had. So then we've got competing stories about what happened. And we're continuing to live in those, right? We're still continuing to live in them. The legacies that we have from the countries that we've lived in, the environments that we've lived in, the families that we grew up in, the communities that we became a part of as we're an adult. Like, all of those have different stories about who we are and what we're doing. And the question is it serving you? Right? Is it serving you? Is it something that's helping you move forward into the future, and the future that you want to live in and you want to then leave to your kids, your grandkids, or to future generations if you don't have kids of your own? Right? And so this is really up for us right now. It's like, what are the stories that we're telling about the collective, about the past, and are they working for us or not? This feels particularly relevant for me right now as we are in the end of the Age of Empire. We've moved out of the Kali Yuga, which was thousands of years cycle, right? And is associated with the Age of Empire, certainly in Europe. And we're moving out of that, right? All of the things that were built during that time are starting to shred, are starting to come apart. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But now, okay, so that's happening. So what do we want to tell ourselves about what that means? And how can we find a story to tell about what that means that is going to set us up to be able to create the future that we really want to be inhabiting? And so you can look at this both in your own personal life, but of course this collective energy. So you can look to your ancestry, you can look to the history of your family, where your family is, what their experience was like that you inherited. But you can also look at your own soul journey to the degree that you have any sense of what that is, and you may or may not. But if you do, you might want to look at that. Like, I've been excavating my past lives for quite a while. It's been part of this whole evolutionary process that I've been in as we are clearing out really the trauma patterns and the wounds from the past so that we can step into this beautiful future that is now unfolding with a much more open heart and much more of a clean slate, if you will, right? Not just so encumbered by trauma patterns. And so you can take a look at that for yourself and go, okay, what are maybe some of the stories that I identified with that I kind of felt like that's who I am? And take a look at that and be like, is that really who you want to be? Right? Maybe it is who you've been, but is there a different story you want to start to tell that would be more inspiring for you and more beneficial for you? So the sun is, again, opposite the earth, and it's opposite where the moon is, and it's really resting on the energy of the earth, and it's in the gate 19. Now, the gate 19 is known as a super sensitive gate. It's one of the most sensitive gates in the chart. It's a symbol often, or a marker of people who are highly sensitive people. And so if you have this in your chart, just know that for yourself. It's really important for you to be honoring your sensitivity and not see it as something that is negative. You may need to learn how to work with it so you can navigate a world that is not super supportive of sensitivity, right? You do that, but don't make your sensitivity wrong. You might need to learn how to manage it. But we're all going to be feeling this really sensitive energy. And it's been renamed attunement in quantum human design. And it is on the root center, and it's tribal circuitry. So it's a pretty different different energy than the collective circuitry of the 33. So, and it's the tribal circuitry, and it's also connected to the gate 49 in this particular configuration, making a complete channel between the root and the emotional solar plexus. And we have Mercury and Venus are both in the gate 49, creating this whole channel. And this channel is known as love and marriage, or intimacy and connection. And it's very much, how do we enter into partnership? Okay, like that, like I said, the 19 is very sensitive. It's where the sun is. The 49 is known as principles or revolution. Do we have revolutionary energy right now? We do, yeah. And so the 49 can kind of fall into this sense of needing a revolution in relationships. Relationships are very highlighted in this alignment because both of the channels that we've got here are in tribal circuitry, which is all about relationships. That 49 energy can act impulsively, that if you're in relationship with someone and they violate your principles in some way, they can just be like, I'm out of here. I'm out of here. You did something that violated my principles, and they could just ghost you. They could just completely be gone, right? That's the kind of leaving pattern of the 49, which is not very functional, right? And so we want to be able to stay in relationship and communicate and work things out together rather than just disappearing if something isn't working. And that kind of disappearing can be extremely difficult for the 19, which is very sensitive, right? And which is trying to kind of connect and see, how can we attune to each other? And then if the 49 is in this energy of judgment, which it can fall into, oh, you violated, right? So here we've got Mercury and Venus lighting up that 49. And Venus in human design is about our values, and Mercury is about our communication. And so you might want to be looking at, in your relationships, how attuned are you to each other? How much are your values aligned with each other? Is there a way that they're out of alignment? And rather than ghosting the other person, to kind of lean into where things might feel a little, clunky, right? And be able to talk about it and work it through and say, okay, how can we get back into connection? How can we make intimacy safe for us? And of course, when you look at love and marriage, which is the original title for it, anybody who's been married, I've been married twice, knows that you really have to be able to stay in difficult conversations in order to be able to work things out. If you just disappear, right, when something isn't going right, you're not going to stay married for very long. Because that's not really how that works, right? So this is really an invitation for us to use that Mercury also, not in its lower expression of ghosting or judgment, but to say, okay, let us look at how can we become more attuned with each other. How can we make intimacy and connection possible and safe and juicy, right? Because we want it to be juicy. And that 49, it's emotional energy. It's in the emotional solar plexus. So you need to give it time. Right? You don't want to do things impulsively. That's when the 49 gets into trouble, because it does things impulsively, or it can, right? But if you can just pause and not do things impulsively, give it some time, lean in, be able to manage the emotional energy that might have come up because of that, and then see what happens. Then we also have the channel 4037 being lit up. Now the 4037 is going to be lit up through May, because the nodes of the moon are there, and they're in the north node and the south node. So the nodes are going to be there for a while. So it's not just this particular transit or this particular time. It's a couple months that they're there. And so the 4037 is the channel that is part of the incarnation cross of planning. And in the human design lore, we have been in the cross of planning ever since the end of the 18th century. And we're moving out of the cross of planning into the cross of the sleeping phoenix. This is what the prophecy of 2027 is all about. And obviously, we're almost at 2027. We're continuing to prepare for that. But also, these things are very long cycles. And so it's not going to just switch over in 1 year. We've actually been bringing in that cross of the sleeping phoenix for a while, and the cross of planning has been breaking down, because this is really kind of an energy for creating cities, for creating civilization. It's known as the channel of the bargain. It's where contracts are. In quantum human design, it's been renamed the channel of administration, right? It's has to do with like government and the bigger things, right? So this is what's breaking down right now. And it's interesting that the nodes are here because they're reminding us how important this particular energy has been overall, really to the world for the last few hundred years. And note here that the south node is in the 40 and the north node is in the gate 37. And the gate 37 is known as friendship in traditional human design, or peace in quantum human design. And our north node is our destiny. It's what we're moving toward. And I love that, right? We are moving toward peace. We're moving towards greater friendship with each other. This is a marker of unity consciousness, right? We come into a state of peace. We grow our friendship with ourselves, with our upstairs team, which I like to call our guides and so on. And then obviously with each other. I mean, this is tribal energy. And so it's how are we going to transmute the energy that we got that was part of the cross of planning, and then move into this real state of peace. How do we juice that up for ourselves? And like I said, this is tribal circuitry, so it's so much about our relationships. So both of these channels are highlighting our relationships, how important our relationships are, what some of the challenges are in our relationships, what we can create together with our relationships, what we need in order for our relationships to be safe, for there to be intimacy or connection, for us to be able to collaborate together. I really think of that 4037 as collaboration. So what is it that we need to be able to make that happen, and to do it in such a way that it is done through friendship and it creates peace? And then let's just take a look here at what is happening. We've got 3 centers defined. It's very unusual. We don't usually have that when we're just looking at a transit like this. And what's also notable is that the 3 centers are all motors. So this is giving this chart a lot of power, a lot of power. So it doesn't have the sacral, which is the most powerful engine in the chart, but it does have the second most powerful engine in the chart, which is the emotional solar plexus, which is also connected to the will and connected to the root. So this is potent energy. And depending on what the configuration is in your chart, like my will center is open and my emotional solar plexus is open. So I'm going to get both of those lit up during this particular transit. So you might want to look at, are these centers open on you, or are they defined already? Because if they're open, you're going to get some extra energy during this time. And you can be thinking about how they're giving you energy to be able to engage with your relationships in a way where you can communicate what you really need, and how can we come together and collaborate and create more peace through our collaborations. Now, of course, an alignment like this could be highlighting the dysfunction that we have in our relationships too. Both, in our families and also communally, because this is a little bit like in the commerce circuit. So it's about the wider community. It's not so much just about our families or the close beloveds. And so it can also highlight the dysfunction. And so if that comes up, just notice it and really lean into it as an opportunity to get more clarity, to get more awareness, and to create more space for healing and connection, rather than falling into fighting with each other, which is what can happen when the dysfunction in our relationships come up, right? But we can use the dysfunction to understand ourselves better, right? I recently had a uncomfortable, unpleasant conversation with a really good friend of mine. And it was not happy while it was happening. And it also led me to an awareness about myself that was really beneficial, that I got to clear something. And so you can use that as an opportunity to get to know yourself better, And you can actually deepen intimacy, right, with the other person if you can both come to it with compassion and with caring and with an open heart that is about, I really want to connect with you. I want the intimacy to be safe. How do we do that with each other? You know, it got bruised a little bit. How do we actually get more into a state where we can align? And I will also say this is a time where so much is dropping away. And it is possible, particularly with at this moon and in its shadow, which will continue for several weeks and months afterwards, is there may be relationships you need to let go of. There may be. I was talking to another friend of mine recently, and she shared how she let go of a family relationship that she just was like, you know what, it's just too dysfunctional. It's just, I can't make it work. I've tried to make it work, and I can't. And it's okay. I'm just going to let it go. So that's also happening. And this is going to be highlighted here too, because remember that 49 revolution principles. If you violate my principles, I'm out of here. That totally can happen. So just pay attention and do the best that you can to bring love into your relationships and acceptance and understanding and the attitude that, you know, we're kind of doing the best that we can. And yeah, we all kind of fuck up on occasion, but let's love each other anyway. Then we also have Mars and Pluto both in the gate 41. So they are conjunct. That's what they would say in astrology, right? They're close to each other in Aquarius, and they're in the gate 41. The gate 41 is known as fantasy in traditional human design and imagination in quantum human design. I talked quite a bit about this in the live stream that I did about the Human Design New Year, because the Human Design New Year happens every year when the sun moves into the gate 41. So I will put the link for that down below if you want to go and check that out. And I talk a lot about imagination and the challenges that we have about outsourcing our imagination to culture, to media, to other people, you know, whatever it is. And how can we reclaim our imagination and really work it and use it for ourselves? And then let's talk about the kind of Mars-Pluto dynamic. So Pluto is known as the higher octave of Mars. So what that means is that Mars is considered a personal planet, right? It's in the inner solar system. Pluto is at the far outer reaches of the solar system, right? They're very, very far apart. Outer planets are known as transpersonal planets and kind of karmic planets. They're generational because they stay in their astrological sign for a long time. They stay in the gates for a long time. So they have a bigger influence on us over time. Whereas the personal planets really move much faster, and they move through the gates pretty fast, and they move through the signs. And so they have a very different energy, right? They're kind of always moving. And so that's more personal for us. And like me, I have an Aries sun, which is ruled by Mars. And so I've had my dance with Mars most of my life. And Mars has really gotten a bad rap, in my view, in Western culture, because Mars was co-opted or, you know, taken by the Romans, if you will, and made into the god of war. And they honored Mars as the god of war and invoked Mars as the god of war and so on. And so he's really been seen in that way. And because he's been held that way so much, Mars can totally show up that way. And Pluto is not so much about war as it is about the deep diving about what is really in whatever Pluto is highlighting, right? And what is dysfunctional that needs to come to the surface that we can then release so that we can rise like the phoenix, right? Because Pluto is phoenix energy. And so it is about, you know, getting into that underworld and bringing it out and then releasing it. And Mars, I like to think of Mars as the spiritual warrior, right? Because I think of like the sacred masculine as really being a spiritual warrior energy. We have some beautiful male teachers who are out now who I think are exhibiting the sacred masculine and spiritual warrior energy, you know, men like Joe Dispenza or David Clements, who are very, very different from each other, right? But both have this kind of sacred masculine energy that we can trust and we can lean into. And they're both absolutely spiritual warriors. And so how do we take that masculine energy that we have and make sure that we're expressing it as a spiritual warrior energy, where our role is to really provide for what is needed for our spiritual growth and protect us so that we can do our spiritual growth. Because that sacred masculine so much is about providing and protecting. And it's a beautiful role for that energy. And it's also our agency, right? Because masculine energy is definitely active. We think of it as agency. Aries is about agency. Mars is about agency, right? It's like, let's go, let's get some stuff happening. And one way to think about Mars and Pluto together here is that Pluto is really working with Mars, and they've been in a dance. I mean, this is not the first time they've been conjunct. It's happened earlier, I think earlier this year. And so there's been this dance that they've been doing together. And I like to think of Pluto as using that kind of spiritual growth energy, right? Excavating what is dysfunctional and bringing it to surface so it can be released. And I think we're seeing that happen with the way that Mars has been held as the god of war. And unfortunately, part of what we're seeing is more of that war energy come to the surface, more conflict energy, more violence coming up in certain places, right? So I encourage you not to see this as a falling back into really warlike energy, so much as a purging of warlike energy. So it's more like a healing, like almost like a healing crisis, if you will, where Pluto is in there working that Mars energy and saying, we're going to excavate that god of war and we're going to bring it to the surface for the purpose of release. And then the last piece I want to bring in here is that Saturn has moved back into the gate 25. Both Saturn and Neptune are moving forward now, and they are in the gate 25, which is the love of spirit. So they're not in Aries yet. They're still in Pisces. They'll be meeting later this month at this great conjunction that's happening on February 20th, which is really an ignition point for new Earth energy, right? It's where these two sky gods come together at the creator degree of the 0 degree of Aries, which is just pure potentiality is what Pamela Gray calls it, right? It's just, this is pure energy. It's kind of like the 0 point, the singularity where everything exists. And the question is, what are we going to do with that? Well, of course, that's also in the gate 25. So it is about spirit. It's about the love of spirit. And how are we going to create from the love of spirit? That's the way I really like to think about it. So hopefully we're going to have gotten some healing with Mars. Right? And we're going to be able to be like, okay, we've purged some of that. Let's come more in a grounded and centered place so that we can move into that ignition point with a more open heart and more compassionate and more caring and deeply connected to our own spiritual embodiment and assignment so that we can manifest that more. So this is just a celebration that now they're both back in the 25 and we'll be moving forward later in this month for a really big, we've got an ignition point on the 17th with a lunar eclipse, which is the new moon. And it's also the beginning of the year of the fire horse. And so that's another really, I'm like, goodness, starting, with an eclipse and the fire horse. And that's just a couple of days before this ignition point where Neptune and Saturn are going to move into the 0 point of Aries. So there's a lot happening on later in the month. I will come back with other videos later about that. So we're at a potent time where we're still being asked to review, take a look at, like, what are the stories we've been living inside of? Are those stories really helping us or not? How are we being in our relationships, right? Are we being reactive? Are we creating revolution unnecessarily? Or are we staying in things longer than we should? And they're really relationships we should exit. What are we doing with our imaginations? Are we in command of our imaginations? Or have we outsourced our imaginations to forces that are not necessarily acting in our best interests? And how can we reclaim our energy? How can we reclaim our ability to be in relationship with each other from the heart? How can we reclaim our ability to tell stories that are empowering and inspiring rather than ones that are harmful and destructive? And how can we do this really with the love of spirit, opening ourselves to more of our own inner guidance? Learning to tap into our own inner guidance is the most critical thing we can be doing at this time, because the outer world has gotten so loud and so noisy. And with AI, I go on YouTube and social media and I see things and I'm like, that is not real. Somebody made that up. And so sometimes it's really hard to know, is that real or not? And how do you even find out? I did a video earlier about our destiny is in our hands, and it was like, how are we going to be able to discern truth from now on with so much misinformation and so much artificial things being presented as true? How are we going to do that? Well, in my view, we're going to do that because we're going to grow our sensing ability to be able to know, because of how our bodies respond to something, whether that's true or not. I had an experience with my kid a couple of days ago. We were watching actually a video of Kelly Kolodny channeling Archangel Raphael, and we both felt the transmission and the truth of the transmission. We were both crying, not because it was something that we believed with our minds, but because we felt the transmission. And we had a conversation about it afterwards, and I was like, this is going to be what we need to be able to do going forward into the future, because there's going to be things presented to us, and how are we going to know whether they're trustworthy or not? And so we want to be able to grow our inner guidance, and our inner guidance is not logical and rational. It doesn't live in the left brain. Actually, the left brain tends to impede our ability to connect with our inner guidance and our own divine self or wise one within. So if you want to grow your relationship with that inner guidance, you want to have that kind of support available to you whenever you want it, and you find it challenging at this point, like there's a lot of noise, you're not quite sure what to focus on, I invite you to come to Ambassador of the Future. It's a workshop I'm doing on Saturday, January 31st. It is free to you. It's my gift to you. It's an opportunity for us to have a more extended period of time. It's from 9 to 12, so it's 3 hours, 9 to 12 Pacific time. And we're going to do some experiential work to get a sense of what is the most important thing that you need to be looking at and working with right now that you want to evolve in yourself. You know how I was talking about Pluto is in there like excavating things and saying, okay, let's take a look at this. All right, what are we going to do with that? And then let's release it. So we're going to do a practice that helps you to identify what that is for yourself and potentially go deeper for it if you already have an idea. Then we're going to work with the nervous system so that you can be regulated and resourced so that you have the energy to start to make a change and start to really release. One of the things that I've learned through doing the recent training in neurosomatic intelligence that I just got certified in is that if we're dysregulated, which a lot of us are, and we are not well resourced, it's almost impossible to make a change because our nervous system will be like, we don't have the energy to make a change, right? And then it locks in and it will do all kinds of things to keep us from being able to move forward in the direction that we actually want. So we're going to work with our nervous system, get really regulated, get really resourced. And then we're going to do some other energy work to help really bring in and open up the portals for you to your inner guidance so you can receive some messages right in the workshop. And then you're going to have an energetic template that you can then step into later on, because you'll know what it's like to be in that resource state and to be able to bring in that inner guidance that you can then rely on. So the link for that will be down below, and I'll put it at the end of the video, and I would love to see you there. I think that this is such an incredibly important thing for us to be doing now. And if you've been feeling like irritable or not sure what to do, what to believe, if you've been, a little too involved in the chaos that's going on in the world, and you're like, okay, I really need kind of a reset, this would be a really good opportunity to do that. And like I said, you'll have a lived experience of what it's like to have that kind of inner guidance. And once you have that, it's easier to recreate it. All right, my friends, this is our full moon in Leo transit report. I really encourage you to take good care of yourself. Of course, this full moon will be the day after the ambassador workshop. So you'll be all ready for this full moon when you do the workshop. I look forward to seeing you then. Many blessings. Much love. Bye for now.